Okay, we're live. Salam, my name is Noura. Welcome to the Samawar Network and the beginning of a new series we have called Women of TSN. And Women of the Samawar Network is a new initiative that we've started to really give a platform to the voices of women in the community. We've been discussing issues that come up for women and different conference spaces, and we thought, why not go live and just have a space for women to discuss their narrative and platform issues that we're grappling with. And none of us are, broadcast professionals. We're all doing this for the sake of our community. And I know I personally feel nervous, and I think some of the women off air before we went live echoed that. So I want to thank the community that's watching in for bearing with us and giving us space to kind of bare a bit of our souls. It does take a lot of courage to have this conversation. Tonight's title is low-key controversial. We titled it Bitches and Zanakah, and because we're discussing labels, and it's a very it's a label that's very alarming and it hits you in the face when we see it. But that's because that's how some of the labels that women have experienced. So we thought, why not let you know sort of like the emotional impact it has when we hear these labels. So as I said, my name is Noura. I am based in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm fortunate to be on the West Coast at the moment. And I will turn to my left, which is Sophie. And why don't you introduce yourself and let us know, like, is there a time that you as a woman has really stuck out and stayed with you in terms of something that you've been labeled?
Yeah, thank you, Noura. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie, and I'm from Orange County. The first time I think one really stood out to me was when I actually took action on it. I remember, to this day, I'm called Kalankar, and like I'm a Jangara, basically bossy, I think would be the translation. So I remember, there was a point in my life where I would take a step back and I would not, share my opinion on certain things, or I wouldn't speak up on certain matters because I figured, being calm and collected really would get my opinion across better.
Sophie. Nazo?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nazo. I am based in Washington, D.C. And to answer your question, Noura, a label that sticks out to me is that of being too educated. And we'll get into this probably a little bit later when we have the conversation, but especially as it relates to my relationship status and being single, it's often because I'm too educated or I'm too ambitious. And so that has come up a lot for me.
Thank you. Medina?
Hi, you guys. I'm Medina. I'm Angeles. In Pashto, and I guess the way that I could describe it is it kind of refers to being in control of her own agency. So like does what she wants. Think of like a streetwalker whenever I like hear that. So like I'll get called that. Because I'm pretty open about my life, and so I go out, and my family knows that I is that they probably don't want me to. So because of that, like, people have referred to me because I don't doing anything wrong, but it's used for that. So yeah.
Thank you. Layla?
Hello, my name is Layla. I'm based out of just a little bit outside of DC on the East Coast. Well, of course on the East Coast. I think the common, one of the common things that I've heard a lot is I'll be called either too masculine or too feminine. So I'm often confused because I don't really understand why I can't be a little bit of both. So I think that's one of the things that I hear a lot. One of the labels I'll get a lot is, oh, you're kind of one of the guys, or oh, you're kind of cool in a very surprising way. So I think that's one of the ones that I hear a lot.
Thank you. Ghazal?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ghazal. I'm from San Francisco. I think in contrast, one of the first earlier labels that I was called was sanguine, but meaning it as a compliment. But since then, it's made me realize that despite my introversion and the reason why I'm reserved, it's always as a means to perform for people. And that's really been affecting throughout my whole life.
Wow. Thanks, Ghazal. How about you, Fifi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Fifi from Los Angeles. So a label that I've heard a lot is feisty, or in Farsi, like jat, and also emotional. But I've heard emotional because of being feisty. That I get, because I'm so emotional, I end up being feisty or jat, so that I can fight too much.
Yeah, thank you. And if y'all can go on mute, because I think I'm echoing. It made me think, Ghazal, when you were saying like even positive terms. So for me, the way I dress, like I've been wearing hijab since I was a teenager, and the decision was purely an awareness of my connection to God. So something that had to do with me and my own spirituality. But I realized that people take my dress and interpret it for themselves in a way that can be demeaning to me and my decisions. And I shared with the women beforehand, and someone told me, a man approached me and said, I find it very attractive that you wear the hijab, because that means that you would be for my eyes only. So it took like a decision that I made for a higher power and turned it into, oh, you made this decision for me or for men, and kind of turned the gaze of my choice into one towards men. So it took my choice of making a decision, a religious decision, and instead of making for a higher power, I interpreted it in a way that really like felt like it took something away from me. And it's something that the women we discussed before we went on air, it's like, they're like, wow, Noura, when you share this, it sounds like that person took something away from you. And I don't know what that is, but I knew that it didn't sit well with me. So it makes me think, so where a lot of these labels or these comments that come from people in our families or in the community, who are setting these expectations? Where does this come from, these labels that we hear that follow us?
I think for me, I think a lot of them come from elders and the older generations and the family trying to preserve the culture and the heritage. And I know something that I struggle with, and maybe others do as well, is that hyphen, right, of Afghan and American. And this older generation is really trying to stick with the Afghan part of it and trying to meld it with a hybrid of American. The expectations and the labels are so different now.
Right. I wonder if others feel the same way about where those come from.
In my experience, which I think is so interesting, is elders that I am in the United States wouldn't expect me to be feisty or to speak up, but family that I have overseas, that maybe still in Afghanistan or another country, they do expect me to be that way, and it's because I'm American or Afghan American. So they're like, oh, she should be that way because she was raised in the United States. Whereas with family here, I don't get that because of I don't know what it is, but people that aren't in the US who have interacted with expect me to be, but people who are here don't expect me to be.
Wow.
Fifi, when they expect you to be that way, is it in a negative way? Like, oh, because you're American, you're this way?
Interestingly, I've had both. Like, oh, you're American, but it's like I get a pass and I don't get, a lot of, I don't get a lot of like pushback for it, but it's been both positive and negative. But either way, it's just been like, okay, well, you're American, that's fine. Like, move on.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think just realizing and recognizing that subconsciously, like as we're growing up, we're kind of being taught what our rules ought to be, not, just the natural course of it and what the potential of our rules are. Just something I've kind of noticed over time.
And are there certain people that are telling you who it ought to be? Is it aunts? Is it your mother? Is it
Yeah,
Like,
I think it's everywhere around. I mean, it's definitely the elders. I totally agree with Nozo on that. But once that gets passed down, that determines what we think is right and wrong, and where, it could even be us sharing it with our counterparts.
Yeah, I also think clear. It's women a lot too, and like in my really, they're very opinionated. They still perpetuate those ideals of they're being quiet or whatever, but then naturally they're like really, really, and so it's sad to see that like they feel not be that way.
Yeah. I think that thinking through where it comes from helps us sort of think about how we perpetuate it. I also think even amongst girlfriends, I mean, thinking about conversations I've had with women, is there blame to go around to women our age about how we perpetuate it? Like, that girl gossips a lot. I mean, like, do y'all have a sense, like, how do we feel about when it comes up within people in our generation like that? Like, are we also culpable to sort of passing this on?
I think definitely. I think we are role playing a little bit. I've seen it, right? I've seen it from folks that are my age or ladies that are my age, where I'll be sitting in a group setting and I'll hear things about people perhaps that I don't know about, and it's I think the word is slut shaming women, and I will hear them talk ill about other women. Oh, I heard she was with this girl or this guy, or I saw her out here and she tries to be this way, and we bring women down, and I do think that happens. But I've also seen the latter, so I can't say that it's all 100% that way, but I have seen just among our community a gradual change happening, where we are actually promoting the good of others rather than just bringing each other down. So I do think you're right in saying that, or just posing the question of, do we do that? Do we bring other people, other women down? And I think the answer is yes, but I also have seen the latter. So I can't say that it's just that alone.
Thank you. So we started out talking about labels, and some of the women in the community posted some labels that came up, and I wondered if we were comfortable sort of getting right into that and talking about some of the labels that have come up. Is there any y'all want to read from the Facebook post?
Yeah, I think we got a few posts in here. I know Crystal sent some in. Thank you, Crystal. So excuse me for some of the words. Do you want me to just read the list out here, or anyone want to take some of these? Is there a bleep, like, censor button somewhere?
I wish. Bashke. For the sake of just, it's said, I'd say go for it and read like a few of them. You don't have to read all of them, but
yeah,
so people know the spectrum.
So just as a forewarning, this is written in English, so I'm reading it in Farsi out of English. So there's Dukhtar, Foisha, Lunda Boz, Shalita, Zanakah Sar Sarak, Zanikucha Boz, is that right?
Bazar?
Yes, Zanikucha Bazar, Azaad, Roshan Fikr, Dayati, Rakhasa, excuse me, Ajiz, Sangin, which you had mentioned a little bit earlier. Dukhtar Filani, that one's my favorite. I think the rest of these, are they in Pashto? Khwar Filani, no, I don't think so. Zuban Baz, my favorite, Kunikata. That's in there.
Hey, I mean, that's real. They're actually getting into physical attributes. How does, like, I mean, because it comes up in convo for us, maybe not in a public space, but when we're with the khala and whatever, people say this, right?
That's right. And then I talk about all that rice that's being made, man. But yeah, so these were some of the words that were sent to us, and there's many, many more.
Does it make you feel uncomfortable to read that on air?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. There's some words in here that I've never used, and definitely words that I've heard, but I would never use to describe another woman. I just don't personally like the idea of labeling like that. I think we just bring each other down that way. But yes, that definitely made me comfortable. And I'm sorry, Mom and Dad.
Thanks for thanks for sharing, being the narrator for that. How does it feel for y'all when you see those words or hear Layla kind of say some of these words we've grown up hearing? And I have to admit, some of these are mainly in Farsi, and then there's Pashto equivalents too. So how did that feel for y'all?
It's funny because some of the ones that Crystal sent, like she was talking about how it's the relation to men too, right? And I just had this random, I remembered something really random. My friend's mom, I don't know her name because my entire life we refer to her as Khalid's Mor, like the Khalid Mor, like that's Khalid's mom. And I'm like realizing like I've known her for 27 years and I still don't know her name. So that just like tripped me out.
That's so true. Is that the same in anyone else's family? Fifi, your family's Hirati. What do they say?
We actually say the person's name, and I've actually had experiences with non-Hiratis where they'll call everybody Kaka John or Amma John, and we don't. We use first name and like so and so John. And I actually had to clarify with to make sure that I'm not being disrespectful by saying the name instead of calling someone Kaka John or Amma John, because I only call my actual Kakas and Ammas, Kaka and Amma. Everybody else I use first name. So I don't know if that's a common Hirati thing or if it's my family.
Yeah, mine is like my dad's side is from Herat too, and with Madina's thing, we'd say Modare, and it's usually a son. So I was the first one. They were like Modar Nura instead of Modar of like the son, and that was controversial because she was labeled something, but to a woman, like she was the mother of a girl, which was apparently controversial. Usually, it's like the mother, and you name the son, and then in my family's instance, they named me, and like that she was the mother of me, which made me more important than some people think.
I've seen that too. Where it was the firstborn, regardless if it was a son or a daughter.
So it's like the mom of usually the male.
Yeah,
that's what.
And how does it feel to be compared to men? Do you think a lot of these labels put us? Is this comparison to men?
I'm wondering if historically speaking, this comes from, and this is me just assuming, guessing, educated guess here. If it comes from like an Arab culture or a prehistoric Arab culture, just because there is like binte so-and-so, and that's usually how it's referred to. So I wonder if this is just something that culturally has been so intertwined that we just have gotten so used to it. And now that we're talking about it, I'm realizing just like the millions of times that it's just gone over me and I haven't even recognized that is what's happening.
A couple of the labels that stick out to me, and Ghazal, you brought this up earlier, around ajiz and sangin, like how those are so revered. And now in like an age of feminism and activism, like that to me seems contradictory to being ajiz and sangin, and that's not something that I would revere for myself anymore. So I don't know, Ghazal, is that something that you still feel like you want to be called, or how do you feel about it now?
Yeah, no, I never wanted to be called that from day one. I think it's like all of these labels, these affect you in the long term. And now I'm trying to get over how it is to interact in my career, in my professional space, in my friendship space, in a manner that would allow me to be more extroverted. But because in our culture, introversion and being sangin and ajiz and keeping to yourself is so revered for some
What does
For
Ajit and
some-
Sangeet mean, Ghazal? Can you define that for those that may not know?
Yeah, so Sangeet, I would say, would probably mean something like watching what you say. I take it as meaning a performance, honestly, because there's introversion in which you can act the way you are most comfortable with which is basically in solitude, versus Sangeet, which means acting like you prefer to be alone and not bothered and interacting with others. So in Aj's pretty much the same, like just it's all a performance. And to me, it's all a performance. So to be called that is just as insulting as everything else, because you're taking someone's like natural state of being, whether it's like the fact that they like to go out or the fact that they like to stay in, and either idolizing it or putting it down. So I've never been okay with it. And I feel like even now it's affecting both my professional life, my friendships, and all of that, trying to learn how to unteach myself these labels that have been put upon me since a very young age as a woman in the community.
And just the fact, go ahead, Sophie.
No, I just want to say that's so interesting because, just displaying behavior that's positive, typically positive traditionally, which is like Sangeet or just being compassionate and nurturing, is essentially seen as weak when it comes to career progression. But then the opposite of that, displaying behaviors that are more so like, I guess, aggressive or bossy or assertive, or could also not really fit the mold of what's seen as positive. So it's kind of like a double bind.
Who here has been called Mardona besides Layla?
No.
Anyone else have used masculine traits? Jangara kind of goes with it, right, Sophie?
Yeah.
Like you spoke up for yourself, so they call you Jangara, right?
Yeah.
Definitely heard that one too, yeah.
I remember my mom came home once and she told me that this person at the mosque tried to compliment her and say, sister, like, you should sit with the men because I don't see you as a woman. You are as strong as a man. And just like, it's because women aren't strong, so I can only be a man. Like, he was trying to compliment her, but it was this weird thing, like, it's positive, then you're a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was a little mind blown last week. I had a conversation with my mom where she's like, oh, my friends complimented me and they were like, you're so Mardona Safat, like you have masculine. I paused. I was like, when you Mardona Safat? She's like, like you have masculine qualities. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, oh, it's a positive thing. And I was thinking, I was like, well, that's interesting because the opposite, what's like the opposite equivalent to that? It's kind of like, has a negative connotation. I mentioned it earlier. It's like being Zancho or having feminine traits. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you hear people describe men as, or like men will describe other men. Oh, this is going a little side, but if you use the B word to describe like a woman, or I'm sorry, a man. So in other words, you're describing a man as being feminine, right? So I think if we look at it just as that, is masculine a plus and feminine a negative overall. So just that in itself, if you were to look at the Farsi language, and if the language itself implies some sort of masculine tendency, that's a little upsetting, I think, just personally, because then it sets that mindset, that natural mindset there. So I think that's something that what you just mentioned, I never even heard that word before. So it's complimenting to say you have masculine tendencies. So that word in specific in Farsi, you're saying, Sophie, is a compliment.
According to my mom.
Wow. And who here has been called bitchy?
Oh, I get called that all the time.
Really?
I mean, yeah. And well,
oh, I have a question. Have we called someone bitchy?
yeah, for
Guilty.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have. And I think that that's like the challenge, right? Like to constantly like check ourselves. And sometimes I fall victim to it too, where like I'll say something and I'm like, oh my God, I just sounded like an old Afghan lady. Like, why was I perpetuating that,
Yeah.
But it's because, those labels have been thrown on us since we were kids. So you have to unlearn it, like Ghazal was saying, like, because we can definitely do that too. But yeah, I've definitely been called bitchy, and it'll be in scenarios where like I just kind of feel like I'm not, like, and it'll be because, you know, I'm opinionated and I say what I want, and like I'm very like forward about that, or whatever, but I don't feel that I am.
Yeah.
Similarly, because of the line of work that I'm in, and being a leader in my industry, I often get labeled as bitchy or aggressive. And this is a conversation that I think American women are having too, right? That like, if I was a male CEO, that's not the label that you would have given me. But because I'm a female bossing other people around because it's my job, now I'm seen as a bitch or, you know, aggressive. And so it's really frustrating because I'm trying to do my job like everybody else, and I'm seen in a pretty unpleasant light at times.
That's very true. I mean, I think we have to somehow balance it out, because when you see a guy being like that, it's like, oh, he's being dominating and aggressive. But when a woman does it, there's no word that goes to a woman and goes, oh, she's being dominating and aggressive, and it's a good thing. So normally it just gets translated into being bitchy.
And I think also for like Afghan women too, like I was talking to my mom about this earlier today, and like the labels that she's heard and things like that. And she was like, you know, your place as an Afghan woman for her generation was in the house, in the kitchen, to make babies, you know, all of that. And so especially being an ambitious Afghan leader, it's like doubly frowned upon, I think, in our culture.
I do want to add, though, that like it's not something to frown upon if you want to be a housewife or if you want to stay at home. And like I mean, if that's a full-time job in itself, goodness, if I were to have that role, just that in itself, I applaud women that can do that, or even men that are stay-at-home dads. Like, doing that role is nothing to be frowned upon. But I don't think that this is the time where that's the only expectation we should have of our women. And that's, I think, what we're up against a lot of the time.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
How does this affect your interactions with people? So you said that in the workplace, this affects, like, the fact that they called you ajiz and sangin, these terms that we've defined, that are like more innocent and quiet, or sort of the rough translation. How does these labels affected your interactions within the Afghan community, also outside of the Afghan community? So a lot of this is that we're women in the diaspora. So I think we've brought it up so we're not trying to demonize Afghan culture, but just really speak on our experiences living as people that come from Afghan communities in the US. So it's a mix of different things, and we're not social scientists that are going to like pin it down on a community. But in these lived experiences, when we hear these labels, how does it influence your interactions in general? And then I can get into a little more a specific question from there, but like just kind of kick that one out.
Yeah, so I work in an industry that's primarily male and primarily white. So in my interaction in these spaces has been very skewed, because the way we interact is for, number one, men, and the number two, white, not for people of color. So learning how to speak out and show my value in these spaces has been incredibly challenging. And this is because typically we've taught, in order to communicate, we communicate to our male counterparts, who then voice these opinions for us, whether it's your brother or your father or whoever it is. And when I don't have male counterparts, when I am in a position where I am a senior, and I'm communicating these ideas, how do I do that in a way where I'm supposed to make eye contact with a man, or eye contact with a senior or an authority figure, all things that are typically frowned upon in the Afghan community. And that has been an incredible challenge, something I'm still going through. I mean, I spoke recently about being in a space where, you know, I'm the only person of color and I'm the only woman. And how do you demand agency, or how do you demand, you know, an audience in these spaces when you haven't necessarily been taken seriously in your own community? Wow. So it's been hard.
Others? I definitely have an anecdote, but I want to ask others before I chime in. The weirdest, I think two things come to mind, but the one I can be an extrovert, so I'm very friendly, and I grew up in Ohio where when you, like, the same greeter at the grocery store across the street from my house has been there since I was 5, and he's still there. And so he knows me, he knows my parents, so it's very much like, hey, how's it going? You know, how is your uncle? How's your dog? Like, that's just how we are, right? And when I come to California and in Afghan spaces, I'm generally that friendly, and I've realized that when I'm like that with men, especially men my age, it's almost misinterpreted, like, oh, she's into me, like she's being hella friendly, where I've now had to really, I'm like, Nora, like, your Ohio friendliness, you need to tone it down. And it may be just like a regional difference in terms of American regional cultural difference, but I also think it gets into like an Afghan difference where now I'm like really nervous about when I meet people of the opposite gender, toning down my personality so they don't see it as too much or as like, oh, she's hitting on me. It's like interpreted in a way that I initially didn't understand. And then I was like, dang. And now there's a bunch of, because I think my girlfriends my age that grew up in Ohio and Michigan and left, they've faced similar things, and they're not Afghan. But I find it interesting that particularly with interactions with men, we've had to really like tone down how we ask questions to others because of how it's perceived to them.
I totally understand that, actually.
Yeah?
'Cause, growing up, my brother's like a couple months younger than I am, and definitely my best friend. Sorry, not a couple months. I mean, he's like a little over a year apart is what we have.
Yeah.
And up until a good amount of my life, I just did not understand what these social norms were for girls and boys. Like, I loved playing cars with my brother. I was competitive. Like, we would go riding bikes and racing, and technically those aren't girl things to be doing. So for me, my brother was my best friend. So growing up, I had a difficulty differentiating, like, oh, I'm supposed to only have girlfriends and not hang out with the guys, or not be cool with the guys, because if I am, it's usually misinterpreted. And in the end, I find that I have put myself in a very difficult position, and I'm perceived differently. So I have had a tough time finding a balance with that as well. So I actually completely understand what you're saying, Nora.
Yeah, I remember like even just being younger, and I always, like, at weddings and stuff and at Afghan functions, I always wanted to go outside and play with the boys. I thought it was so boring to sit on the table and like, you know, I was 12 years old. I didn't want to sit there next to my mom and dad and like watch the dancing or whatever. I wanted to go outside and play with the boys, like with my guy cousins. And my mom hated it. To this day, she's like, I remember you running in the halls and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? Like, she made it seem like it was so bad. And she would say that people are going to think it's so bad that all you want to do is like run around in these halls with these boys. And for me, it was just like, dude, but that's what's fun, you know? And to this day, like, yeah. And I remember, like, to this day, she'll bring it up and I'm like, wow, that's so sad. You know, it's so sad. And she would always say, like, I just want you to like sit next to me, like Sam Sangin, like sit here, you know? And I would always like, dude, I hated that word because I'd be like, man, Sangin means I'm not going to have fun. Like, that's what that means.
Yeah. We're back on our labels again, Sangin.
Yeah, dude. Oh my God. Yeah. So I'm traumatized from that.
I've recently had a relative tell me that I'm never going to meet anyone, as in a significant other, if I continue hanging around my guy cousins, particularly because I live with them. So yeah, it's not just from weddings of yesteryear. It's still alive and well.
So that's a good question.
So do you like, does that, you know, do you notice that showing up in your everyday life? Does that actually impact you, and do you see some truth to it, or?
I mean, I think there's probably a whole slew of reasons for my relationship status. I don't know if my cousins are one of them.
Well, let's get into the love one. Like, what does this affect how you guys approach dating and romance? And no one has to answer if they don't want to, but I think that because of how we've been raised to be quiet and whatever, have to approach that differently than men. And I have 3 brothers, so I've seen my guys in my family approach much more freedom in terms of thinking about the consequences than my sister and I. Does that? How about you guys?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like most definitely. Really similar to what Nazo was saying. Like my mom my mom and older Afghan women would also say that too. Like, you're never going to meet a good Afghan guy if you continue to like go out, and if you continue to let people, like, I was always made to feel like I'm supposed to hide my nightlife. And I don't care. Like, I don't care. Like you guys know me. I put everything on social media. I don't care. And so my mom would hate that. Like, she would be like, well, what, you can go, but why do you have to like tell everyone that you're going? And you will never meet a good Afghan man who's going to want to be with you, knowing that, you know, like, you go out and do whatever. So definitely, like, yeah, like, you know, this definitely affects interactions when it comes to love. And it sucks because it's like, of course, ideally everybody, I mean, it would be nice to have a partner like from your culture and your religion. It's easier for your families, and because our culture is so strong. So definitely, yeah.
And anyone else?
Yeah, can I say something?
Go
I
for
just
it.
think it's funny. I was thinking what Nazla said brought to mind something like when you're younger, you're told to be like, you know, like a good girl and basically on performance, on show, so that men or men's mothers can come after you. And then after you reach a certain age, you're like, oh shit, you know, she's not married. Like, what the hell's wrong? And then what do you have to do? You have to be chalak. You have to go after that guy. You have to. So it's like your whole life is centered around being one way up until a certain age, until you get a man. And then after that, you know, if you don't get a man by that time, then you're supposed to basically shift personalities and find a means to go after him, because guess what? Like, you being a good little Afghan girl, whatever, didn't work out for you, or whatever you've been doing hasn't worked out for you.
And Ghazal, you said something, oh, sorry.
Go
You said
ahead,
something
Layla.
I'm sorry, you said something very interesting there. You said 2 things. One of the things you said, oops, I forgot the first half of what you said. Oh no. But the second half, you were talking about how you said you're forced to the point of having to chase someone. You said the first half of what you said was that you have to present yourself a certain way and be on your best behavior. And I want to chime in on behalf of the men and say, I think men to some extent have to do that too. But I think they get away with a lot more in our culture. I will say that much. So I think that plays true for both genders, just to be fair. The second half of what you said is not accurate to men, which is then you're forced to this point of like running after or chasing or whatever, like being a bit more aggressive for a guy or to be more assertive towards a guy. And then in that case, both men and women will jump on the bandwagon and point at that girl and be like, oh, she's so desperate, or this or that. There's immediate names that come calling after that. I mean, both men and women. But if a guy does that, if a guy's chasing after a girl, it's not frowned upon or even deemed bad. It's very difficult for a school of people to be like, oh, that guy's kind of weird. It takes a lot for a guy to be labeled something like that than it is for a woman, I think, to be labeled the latter. So just, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you here, Nazo.
No, I was just going to connect what Ghazal and both of you are saying now to kind of the earlier conversation of labels, right? So like,
Yeah.
Again, when I was talking to my mom today, and one of the labels that came up was, you know, when you're single and of a certain age or a little bit older, it's what's wrong with that girl, right? Like what's wrong with her? What bad qualities does she have? And now she's labeled as like, something's wrong with her, weird, or, you know, not marriage material. And I think that's really tough. when that might not be the case.
Now, do we think that that's something that is more heavy with like our Asian background? Because I think it's like a pan-Asian thing. Like I think Asians in general will think that way. Is that something that's more prominent in like our culture or cultures, or is it something that we think is just accurate from women across the board? What do you think, Nazo?
I think it's probably accurate for women across the board, but probably more so with the Asian diaspora. I think American women, they are probably on the front line now of it's okay to be single and I can be a powerful single woman and be independent, and people are much more accepting of that than I think are of Afghan women who would want to be that way. But I do think it's probably tough for both. From my own experience, I think it's harder for us right now.
I agree with you. I completely agree with that.
Have you heard of Ring by Spring? Has anyone heard of that?
No.
So my friend went to Baylor University in Texas, and they had a thing where you had to put a ring on it by the spring of your senior year of college. So, and then growing up in Ohio was very much like by the time you finished college, like you were supposed to marry your college boyfriend. And so I remember the conversation coming up a few years after college where people were like, oh my God, like I get text messages from girlfriends from high school, like so-and-so is still not married. Or, oh my God, Nurab, like you're supposed to be like the religious good girl. Why aren't you married? Like what's wrong with you? And because like in our small town, very much like Friday Night Light community in Ohio, that was what you did. Like grew up in a Christian community where you get married by college, marry the guy you were dating in college, have a baby before 30. And when we violated that, then like the text messages would start like, why is so-and-so not married? Is she queer? Like what's going on, right? So it's interesting to see. I see some regional differences, maybe because I come from like a more conservative part of the country that also like connect with the Pan-Asian stuff too.
Now I'm going to play devil's advocate. Is that just for the women that, ring by spring, or is it for the guys? Do the guys have that expectation too?
A guy can be 35 and single, and it's not as harmful as a female being 35.
I'm just saying, I totally agree with you, Sophie. Yeah, no, yeah. So I agree with you. Yeah, and so but I have heard from like our Afghan like men though, if they hit like upper 20s and on, I will hear them say things like, yeah, my mom's pressing me about like getting married, things like that. But it doesn't have this connotation of what's wrong with you. But Afghan women,
shame, right? There's like a sense of shame that comes with it.
Yeah, Afghan women, it's like we're broken or something. Shit.
Yeah, and I feel like it also goes around like your duty to bear children. So you need to do it until a certain age because guess what? You have to be popping them out like before you're 30.
Biological.
Versus like men, you have like Hugh Hefner and stuff who can do it, at whatever age. So
have you guys seen My Cousin Vinny, the movie? Please
no.
tell me. No? What? She goes, my biological clock is ticking like this. No? Perfect.
You have a biological and cultural expiration date, it feels like.
Yeah. So crazy. Well, so one question that came up, I think it was Bilal that asked, how are your experiences interacting with Afghan American men different than other American men?
Totally different.
Very different. Whoa.
Dude, like especially because I'm so outspoken and I feel like a lot of people in the community know me and like my blog or whatever, blah, blah. Like I automatically sometimes like if I'm, and not so much the AAC guys, because I've come to like know them and we've all grown really close,
AAC being the Afghan American Conference?
Afghan American Conference, right. But definitely like I just even growing up, so even before like I was interacting a lot with the Afghan American community, I just felt like Afghan men are it's like they automatically assume that like you have secrets to hide, or they automatically assume that like they're gonna find something out about you, or that you're shady, or like, what is she really about? And I wouldn't get that vibe from American men at all. Like I feel like I could interact with American men and like they would get to know me. Whereas if I'm interacting with Afghan men, I feel like I have to prove that I'm not this preconceived notion about what they think about girls who go out, or girls who are outspoken, or girls who are or moved away for college. You know what I mean? So it's totally different.
I'd love to chime in. Is it okay if I chime in? I keep saying,
for it.
okay, I'm sorry. I have two ways to kind of approach this. So one would be with the opportunities that I've had performing on stage, singing, and then the other being actually my photography business. So it's funny, both of my, I guess, occupations in a way. So with singing, I've seen more particularly that it has been with the Afghan community, and then more so Afghan men that perceive me as maybe being easy, or like being this person that perhaps must be a party girl, and like I have to have this certain persona to me that I have to be able to do, right? That's like off the bat, kind of like what you were just saying, Medina. That is like the perception that I get. But then whereas with American men, they almost don't care. That's not like a perception that matters at all. So it's not emphasized.
Yeah.
So I can be myself, and then they'll be like, oh, you don't party, or you don't drink, or you don't then it's just like, okay, and then next topic of conversation. It's not this thing that needs to be dragged out and then picked apart and looked at. And then the other half of that, like when I have gone and done photography, I mean, just last night I was at not last night, recently, not too long ago, I was at an event, and I recall someone commenting my clothing. Our uniforms to wear all black. And he came up to me and said, you know that all that black makes your eyes pop out. You look beautiful. Like, and I looked at him, and that's something that I don't get that kind of approach usually from American men while I'm working. I gotta say, like when I'm in work mode, whenever we've worked with American families, they have been more respectful towards me, especially American men, than the latter, than like our like Asian, Pan-Asian diaspora of folks. So I'm not sure, but it's like the moment I step out of the shadows with our community, for me personally, I feel like it allows people to be like, well, you have stepped out of your room, so therefore I can say something. Whereas American men really don't do that to me. So I actually feel more respected more than half the time by American men.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, even just like the way, in my experience, the way Afghan men have approached me has always been kind of rude and like off-putting, you know? And I feel like American men would not approach me in that way. And just even like, for instance, like, even like the gaze, like I feel like the gaze from Afghan men can sometimes be really demeaning too. And they feel a sense of,
what do you mean by the gaze?
Like, look, like, let's say for instance, like if I always use this analogy, and this is kind of getting off topic, so I'll keep it short, but like, I always feel like if I wear shorts around an American man, I don't feel like they're just staring at my legs the whole time. But if I wear shorts around an Afghan, like I feel like that's the only thing that they're focused on, and you know, so
yeah.
I had a point with that, but yeah, it's just different.
No, dress affects it. That's totally true. Yeah.
I've heard this is my favorite line. Oh, well, she asked for it. What? Or she dressed that way, so she asked for that attention. Or, you know, if she dresses that way, then that means that she wants it. I'm sorry to be like blunt like that. I've heard all of these things. And sometimes I get very frustrated. And I wonder, what if she does want that attention? What is so bad about that? I think that's usually where my mind goes sometimes. But for me, I think with going on with what you're saying, I think when I've been around a crowd and a woman is dressed a certain way versus like with an Afghan crowd, I will hear, again, men and women say something about a woman and how she's dressed more so in like our community than amongst Americans or non-Afghans, I should say.
Yeah.
Fifi, you worked in banking. How was that? Did you notice a difference in terms of people that came that?
Fifi, you said that you were gonna chime in on something.
Well, I was going to say two things. Something that we talked about a little earlier, being single. I was at a wedding about 2 years ago, and one of my mom's friends is like, oh, so when are you getting married? It seems to be the subject every time you're at a wedding and you're single. And I said, oh, you know, I'm actually working on my master's right now, so I'm really busy. And her response was, oh, that's what you're wasting your time with?
Wow.
You could have been married by now. And both of my mom and dad were at our table, and they just looked at her like, oh my God, what are you saying to my daughter? And So it was considered a waste of time instead of an accomplishment. Whereas I feel like if I said, oh, my wedding is going to be in 6 months from now, that would have been more of an accomplishment to this particular person than my me obtaining my master's degree was. So I wanted to mention that, and also interacting with Afghan men versus American men. So most of my interaction with Afghan men has actually been more professional settings like conferences. And I've also been at a lot of conferences which is not geared towards Afghan men. And walking into in a conference where it's like for my job, for example, I very comfortably can go up to and sit at any table, shake hands with people, introduce myself, whether they're male or female. But I've definitely noticed that when I walk into a place where I know the majority of people will be Afghan, I'm very cautious and I'm not shaking people's hands, not approaching men that are sitting at a table. I'd definitely go find another female to go sit next to, just because of you just feel like you know that people will say things about you if you were to do that. And going back to my experience in banking, so I was in banking for 6 years and I did really well. And a lot of times I outperformed my male coworkers. There was actually one incident where I outperformed a male coworker one day, and it resulted in him being verbally abusive towards me. In our back room where our vault is, there were cameras there, but it was so terrifying for me, so scary for me. I actually left banking after that incident because it was so scary. So just being competitive in a corporate environment was tough, and being one of the only girls there that was in a leading position was also really tough.
Yeah, I think that those are the kind of, I hear you on that. These conversations are tough in terms of how we negotiate it. And I was in a master's program that was international. And so there's a lot of men that were like Iranian, one international student from like countries that are similar to ours. And they're Americans, and we were like in a quantitative class that was more male dominated. And we had to split into study groups, and I naturally gravitated to the study group with the American guys because I didn't want them to think that I was trying to study with them for ulterior motives. And I remember like very much having to like censor myself, and my instinct was like, oh my god, that guy speaks Farsi too, we can drink chai, and then I was like, no, but then what if they think, and then my fear of what if they think, I was like, I'm better off with like, I can just focus on like passing this class. And that's me passing judgment on him too, which is unfair, but coming from some of the baggage that we've dealt with, that's where my reaction towards judging him came from. And I feel guilty putting that judgment on someone I don't know, because it was like, I need a study group. It's definitely not going to be the international person from Iran. But it does affect our interactions. Yeah, so this kind of gets us into what are the implications of these labels? So we're talking about the implications of interaction, but what are the other implications of these labels on our lives beyond our interactions?
I think it's
go ahead.
Go ahead, Layla. I think it's interesting. I remember walking in on a conversation with some men talking about a girl basically like, look, who's a good girl, and this other girl being on a dating app. And I remember just kind of pushing back on that. And we realized like when they were trying to discover like, oh, good guys, it was kind of like judging the guy's reputation based on its own merits. And for the female, it was like we're determined when evaluating who's a good girl to impose like, very restrictive labels. And implying their character is just linked to whatever those labels are. It's not necessarily like good person, good heart. It's like, what's the history? What's, does she go out? Like, does she, whatever that may look like for whoever. But I think good girl versus bad girl versus good guy actually is huge.
Yeah, no, for sure. Talking about like implications, like it's very damaging. And like this perpetuated culture of like erasing Afghan women and shaming them for being vocal and shaming them for taking control of their own agency is really detrimental. And I think it affects our lives in every facet. So it's work, it's love, it's friendship interactions, you know? And it's really sad when it's perpetuated by our moms or it's perpetuated by women in our family, because if you feel like you can't be honest, or if you feel like you can't like be yourself, especially around your family, especially around someone like a mom or like an aunt, then where's your safe space? You know what I mean? Like the fact that that Afghan women, a lot of us feel like we have to live a double life, that's really sad and that's not healthy. And how can you grow up and like go get your own career and do your own thing when you were told from such a young age that like everything about you is in relation to other people and watch what you do because everyone's looking? Like, I'm surprised that, and I'm so happy that there's so many Afghan women going out and doing their own thing, but I'm surprised that given our culture and just unfortunately the way that it is against women, like that we can even like walk out the door. Do you know what I mean? Like I think it's really damaging. I think the implications are like really heavy. And I think like we're tough, like Afghan women are very tough, and because we go through these things and we hear all of these things, like it's ingrained, but you don't really realize like how toxic it is until like right now. Like I feel like it's really hitting me right now where I'm like, oh my God, like this is so sad that we even have to have this call and we're like all nervous beforehand about it. And you know what I mean? Like that's sad.
I think something you just mentioned was very interesting. Right before that, I think you said Afghan women are tough. I think women in general are very tough. I mean, we go through the whole, I mean, we bring life in a way, correct? But perhaps maybe I think Afghan women tend to be more tolerant. I think that's the word that you were looking for. And then earlier you were mentioning how like it's tough that, or you're surprised that we even step out, you know, considering all the things that we're doing and kind of pushing boundaries a little bit. And I've actually been approached numerous times mid-working by other Afghan women saying, I'm proud of you being Afghan. First, they're surprised I'm Afghan and working. And then they go, oh, well, I'm happy that you have your own work and your own business and you're pushing forward as an Afghan woman, even as small and minuscule as what I'm doing. I think it always catches me off guard every time that is something that is necessary to be said to me. That's what I note, is that someone feels that it's necessary to mention. But back to what you were mentioning earlier, Sophie, you were mentioning the word good girl. And I was going to say, you were talking about how it affects us, Noura, the terms and the labels that we use. I think psychologically speaking, and I might be saying this wrong, Nazo, but I just remember my sister didn't like to use the word bad girl for her daughter if she ever did anything wrong. And finally I asked her why, and she said, you know, the idea behind it is, you know, well, if you tell someone, oh, bad girl, she's going to grow up and be like, oh, well, you know what, I'm just going to be whatever, I'm going to be a murderer or this or that, and I'm going to be that way because I'm a bad girl. So you were asking how it affects us, and I think one of the ways that it affects us is when we start calling people certain things and that person hears it enough, they start actually filling those shoes, whether they are or not that at all. They start actually fulfilling that. So I do think it affects us. And I think it affects the person, definitely, that it's being said about. So, for example, if the girl is superficial, if that's the word we want to use, oh, she likes very high-end things. And maybe she doesn't. But all of a sudden, she keeps hearing that this is the way that she's described. Sooner or not, she's either going to be sensitive about it and feel unhappy, or she's going to be pushed to the edge where she will fulfill that. I think that in itself, that is a way that labeling affects us as a community, definitely. So that was all I wanted to add on to that.
And I find it interesting because even in my grandmother's generation, she's divorced, and she got divorced when she was like, when she had grandkids, when I was around, right? And it left a stigma on her. And I didn't think that her age, and I don't even know if she's comfortable with me talking about it publicly now. I'm like, crap, what did I just say? But honestly, I think that when there was conversations about that, right? And so the implications of what, like even a process like a personal decision you make and how that leaves a mark on a woman versus a man can look different. Like it affects them both in devastating ways, but in the way that they're talked about, just seeing how they talked about my grandmother versus my grandfather was different. Like now, when I think about my grandparent, their divorce, I think about my mother. I don't think about my grandfather. And it's not because my love for them is any different. It's because I saw the impact they had on the talk around her and not around my grandfather. And both are alive and great individuals who have left positive impact on me, but that's the reality. And now that we're kind of wrapping up, I wanted to sort of segue into solutions, like that we can think about tackling this. Like, how will you have a conversation with young Afghan women to uplift us? Or if you make the decision to start your own family and have a daughter one day, like what are solutions to sort of getting us out of some of these binds that hurt our women?
I'll start. I think this conversation is definitely a start, right? And having this amongst us women, but I think we need to push this conversation out to others that we have also implicated tonight, right? So we've talked and made some assumptions about men in our community, and we've talked and made assumptions about the elders in our community, and we need to figure out how to have conversations with them about how this is affecting us, about how the dynamics are changing, about what we want for ourselves moving forward. And so it's really about bringing more people into this conversation that are important to us and that shape who we are as it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, for sure. And just like hearing everything and like kind of just mulling things over in my head, like I think in interacting with other Afghan women, like it would be great in terms of solution just to like not assume things about them and like just really create a safe space for us to feel like we can be ourselves. Ourselves if and when we are labeling another Afghan girl or girls in general, but because we're kind of talking about how this pertains in our culture, I'm just going to keep saying Afghan. So yeah, I think just like checking ourselves, checking the people around us, and then just safe, warm space where they can be themselves. Like I know like if and when I ever have a daughter, like I would never want to perpetuate that culture of making to hide anything from me or live a double life.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely holding one another accountable, holding the men in our lives accountable, bringing them into these conversations, helping them recognize blind spots and bringing it to their attention. Don't just brush it away. I think it's huge in the culture that we live in and how, we choose to move forward. I think it's very important to bring our family into this conversation, specifically the men. And I also, want to make sure we're being inclusive of all voices of women, because it's so easy to just kind of stick to what, this we think is right. And it's pretty progressive, but I know that there are women out there who probably agree with some labels or who probably see it as like, well, we aren't the same, right? And just acknowledging like, we're not the same, but we want equal value. We should be valued equally. So make sure we're representing all voices and being inclusive of that.
Great. And to sort of wrap up the conversation, what makes you proud to be an Afghan woman? We've been talking a lot about like some of the things that have hurt us, right? And I hope that if you're not an Afghan woman and you're listening in, you don't see us as victims, but as people just trying to reclaim our narrative and really just talk about some of the pains and struggles and be our ally and step up in this conversation. For me, what makes me proud to be an Afghan woman, they're fighters. To me, fighter is synonymous with Afghan woman. It's not men. For me, a fighter is gender neutral. And when I see a fighter, I see my mother. I see my Khala Fari. I see my Khala Rai, my Khala Narwan. I can name you the Afghan women. To me, they're synonymous. So for me, a fighter is one who's resilient through all the, everyone in our community has gone through. but I'm curious if others have a word or something that makes them proud to be an Afghan woman.
For me, I think that I've seen so many Afghan women that have been denied so many opportunities. And even with that, I've seen that they've been able to create opportunities, even though they've been denied over and over again. And that makes me so proud of all the Afghan girls that are on our panel tonight. And then every Afghan girl that I've ever met really has been able to create opportunities for herself, even though she's been denied. And that makes me really proud.
I think we saw this recently, right, with the robotics team. So we had a group of women that are girls from Afghanistan that were competing, right, and they in the robotics team, but they weren't granted their visas to come here. So one thing I saw from that, which I do see in us Afghans, is this persistence, this drive. We really do try hard. I mean, regardless of if we are going to be stay-at-home moms, we are still expected to work hard and go to school. You know, we still have that standard of making sure that we're not uneducated, and we do try to speak up and stand up for ourselves. So it's interesting. I know it seems paradoxical, but that is something that we encourage amongst each other and ourselves.
Yeah, I think very similar to what Noura John was saying, like that resiliency piece. I think Afghan women have exceptional resiliency. The cards are really stacked against us, and just like what Fifi was saying too, like we make those opportunities for ourselves. And it's ironic that, like, you know, we're supposed to be quiet or whatever, but I feel like Afghan women are always like the funniest, like the out and lively. Like, I think that Afghan women are very lively, considering everything that we're kind of faced with. So that makes me proud to be a part of a community and a culture that cultivates women like that.
Forever the rebel, I'm going to reframe your question, Noura,
Go for it.
and say that I'm proud to be an Afghan American woman, because I think I'm in a really unique opportunity and spot to be able to take the best from both cultures and create an individual for myself and create something that I hope to give my daughter one day. And so it's really special to be able to take from both.
Thank you.
I want to chime in on this. I think when I think of Afghan women, I think of the word unfettered. Like, despite the chains and the shackles and whatever that seem to bind us, we're somehow still free, and we somehow still find a way to overcome those chains despite it all in our own ways.
Sophie?
Yeah, resilience, hard work. I see it in my mom, and I see it, you know, with the women around me. And I think you're faced against the odds, and you don't allow that to really come before you.
Great. Thank you so much. It is, when I say it's an honor, it's an understatement to be in this. With the words you described are the words that I see you women in this conversation with me. So I thank you for your friendship and your conversation, and I hope that community watching see our best intentions in having these conversations and support these conversations continuing. And with that, we conclude this evening's session, but look out, because Women of TSN is a series and we'll have much more to come in the future. Shab khush. Good night.